Hello, we're going to start our look at this exam unit by talking about the differences between data, information, and knowledge. And it would be very easy to blur these words together and assume they all mean kind of the same thing, but actually there are some clear differences between them. So data are letters, numbers, or symbols in an unorganized form. There's no real structure, no real context to this, just letters, numbers, and symbols slapped on a page. We don't really know what they represent. However, we can quite easily convert data into information. So information is data that has been processed in a way that gives it meaning. So it therefore has some structure, therefore has some context. Processing itself is just changing or organizing the data, taking it from one form and putting it in another form. Perhaps you're doing some calculations, perhaps you're sorting it, perhaps you're adding some annotations or some labels to it. You're giving it the context, giving it structure, so that it becomes information. And perhaps the hardest one to define is knowledge. So knowledge is the understanding of how to use information to solve a problem. Information on its own is not necessarily super useful, but if you've got knowledge, then you're able to use that information to solve a problem. To give you an example, well, if I just gave you some random letters, numbers, and symbols like these, that on its own is just data, because you don't really know what that is. There's no context, there's no background, there's no clarity on what those represent. You may be able to guess, but you don't know for sure. However, if I do a bit of processing and add maybe some more labels, maybe do some organization, and maybe look up what these actually mean, I might present something like this. The next 5 Heathrow departures are these, what are clearly flights. I've maybe looked up where they are going to and added that. That's processing, that's me adding some context to this data. This is now information. And clearly that is usable for somebody. The top bit isn't really usable unless it has been processed. So how does knowledge differ to this? Well, knowledge is how you would use this information to solve a problem or make a decision. Well, let's say you worked at Heathrow, you worked at the airport. You might need to use this information to help customers. So you might know from your knowledge that for British Airways flights, you might know that BA is short for British Airways. Those flights to Berlin and Dublin always go from Terminal 5. Therefore, if somebody's asking you about those flights, you know to direct them to Terminal 5. That's knowledge. That's you understanding how to apply this information in a real life scenario. And in data analytics, we tend to want to go from data to information to knowledge so that we can eventually solve a problem. Now, you can be asked about the different sources of these 3 terms. The word source means where something has come from originally, and this can really vary depending on the context you're given. Just to give you some examples, well, data are these raw numbers, symbols, letters. They often are collected automatically by things like sensors. A sensor is a device which can read values from its surroundings, perhaps light, perhaps temperature. A lot of data is just automatically collected by programs running on a computer. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, things like your search history or all your passwords or your downloads are just automatically recorded by a web browser that creates data which can be used. YouTube is recording how long you've watched this video for. It's recording whether you've liked it, whether you've subscribed. That's all being recorded automatically. And sometimes we just manually enter data. For example, maybe a survey, you might type in some responses, submit it. That's you entering it yourself. Don't forget, information is where it has been processed. So we've gone from this raw data into a more structured, meaningful form. Often databases and spreadsheets are what we picture when we picture loads of data sat there with that structure. And of course, things like articles and books and magazines and newspapers collate data and summarize it and give it some more meaning. That's all information. And websites present information as opposed to raw data. So how do we get knowledge? Well, knowledge is just built up over time, most often through experience and through learning. Right? You studying this course is you building knowledge. You know how to answer exam questions once you've done lots of learning. And of course, if you need ready-made knowledge, you speak to an expert, because an expert is someone who has knowledge. They understand how to apply the information to solve a problem.